Today we're putting Google's Gemini 2.5 Pro to the test with the Box AI API. I'm Alex Novotny, developer advocate here at Box. Let's get started. So I have an invoice here for a customer named RATTC. It is different food products with quantities and unit prices. And I'm going to ask 2.5 Pro to do some pretty advanced calculation for this particular invoice. Let's jump over to the code. So in the code, I'm using our Python SDK Gen SDK. And for the prompt, I told it to think deeply and assume that every line item, if it's under $30, gets a 15% off discount. I want it to do all of that math, and then at the end, add $5 on for a shipping fee. And I've also asked it to run the math twice to make sure that it's correct. And at the end, I'm outputting a JSON object with the total amount. So I'm going to go ahead and run this. And while this is processing, it could take a little bit of time because it's doing some pretty intensive calculations. The reason you might want to do this with the API is if, in your particular application, you want to generate a new invoice based on a certain discount, right? You could use a prompt just like this and generate a new invoice or predict a new total based on AI without having to run those computations yourself. The content's stored in Box and you don't have to send it anywhere else. And looking at the response, it says that the total would now be $1,238.59. And I can confirm that that is correct, having done the math in Excel myself. So that's really awesome that it can take all of these lines of data from an invoice, do math that's relatively complicated, right? And then output the appropriate value in a JSON object. For the next example, I want to compare two different 10Ks, one from Apple and one from Google. If you're not familiar, 10Ks are like really long financial documents. Obviously, these are going to be great tests for 2.5 Pro just because there's a lot of information for it to process. Jumping over to the code, I've asked the prompt to look through the full document and identify 4 different things. And they're relatively random. One is how much did they each spend on like property, plant, equipment, who spent more? What are the potential tax savings that each company is not taking advantage of? Comparing just the overall financials of both companies, right? And ponder which could potentially be better in the future. And then what are the biggest risks for each company? And then again, I'm having it output a particular JSON object that we could then use in a subsequent process, right? So you can think, hey, I have these two 10Ks. I want to generate a report based on them using something like Box DocGen. And this would allow you to get that information to put into that other process. So let's run the query. And again, this is probably going to take a little bit of time. Awesome. So now we have a response. It took approximately 30 seconds, which again, it's looking at huge documents, finding very specific pieces of information and putting it into an object that I asked it to do, which looking at this, it actually did it. It identified the 4 different questions and each of those have an answer. So I could then take this answer and put it in a formatted, report template that I could use down the road. And looking at the actual response, I'll just look at the first question. I asked it, who spent more on, property, plant, and equipment. It's saying, Alphabet spent $51,902 million, and Apple spent $9,447 million. So obviously, you should think that Alphabet spent more, and it does, in fact, identify that as the response.